backstage, Doug Drysdale. I mentioned him at the top of the show. He's the CEO of Cybin, ticker CYBN. AB, let's bring him on the show.
How we doing, Doug? Happy Monday. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join us here on Benzinga Live. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks, gentlemen. Thanks for having me today.
You're welcome. So real quick, before we get started, for some of our audience that may not be familiar, do you mind just giving us a quick rundown of what it is that Cybin does and what the mission is there?
Yeah, so Cybin is a biopharmaceutical company, and we're working to transform psychedelic drugs that we've known about for decades now into actual therapeutics for mental health disorders like depression, addiction, and anxiety disorders.
Got it. So last week, I know we saw some news about CYB003. So that's one of your guys' proprietary drugs. Do you mind just overviewing that news real quick?
Yeah, last week was actually an historic week in the many decades that people have been working on trying to transform these molecules into actual therapeutics. Two pieces of data became available. One was from one of our peers that for the first time in a 200 plus patient study, unequivocally proving that psilocybin, which is the active ingredient that comes originally from magic mushrooms, proving that it works in depression, in helping to treat people with depression, both a solid and robust result. At the same time, Cybin released data showing that finally, after decades, we're able to completely transform this molecule and turn it into something that's actually useful as a therapeutic. The downside with psilocybin historically has been that clinic times are 8 hours. So your patients are in the clinic for 8 hours at a time, and significant side effects and adverse events. And with CYB3, we've shown that we can cut this clinic time in half, and we can reduce potential for side effects like nausea and headache and other adverse events in half as well. So a major breakthrough.
So essentially, you're saying that psilocybin on its own, which like you mentioned, is what's found in magic mushrooms, has been proven to help with depression, but there have been downsides to just taking oral psilocybin. So with CYB3, you were able to kind of address some of those downsides to the actual psilocybin.
Exactly. So we've taken psilocybin, we've made it synthetically in the lab, and then we've modified it to improve the profile so that it has a safer profile for patients, and they spend half the time in the clinic.
Got it. So for some people out there that may have some of these psychological disorder, major depression disorder, bipolar, I know some of them have tried a lot of different things, and different medicines on the market don't work. So is this something that can be seen as an alternative to helping these patients when those other medicines don't seem effective?
Yeah, once approved, I hope so. When you look historically back at how we treat depression, we typically use drugs called SSRIs, which are like Prozac. And when you look back over the last couple of decades, on average, SSRIs typically are no better than placebo in patients with mild to moderate depression. And many patients try 2 or 3 or more of those SSRIs before running out of options. And so CYB3 now provides, once it's approved, another option for patients to tackle their depression, addiction, and anxiety disorder.
Doug, this is Spencer here. I want to ask you about the headline we got late last week, and we're getting again here today about just the Republican bill to legalize cannabis. I sort of group these two things together. I know they're not really technically the same thing, but I sort of look at psychedelics as sort of following the cannabis lead in every respect in terms of just regulation and capital markets. I'm wondering if the move by the GOP, if that has sort of changed the equation at all for psychedelic regulation at large in the US, or not really?
No, not really. They're quite different. So I see that there's a general sentiment change towards looking at these alternative types of treatments, and that's all positive. But we're looking at drug development that needs to go through the FDA, and we have studies planned that are coming up in early next year. FDA has granted breakthrough therapy status to psilocybin, so they've indicated that this molecule is really potentially important in mental health. And DEA just came out and said that manufacturers should be making more of these substances to allow more research to be done. So I think we're seeing very positive signs for both DEA and FDA when it comes to turning these molecules into actual therapeutics that can be prescribed by a physician.
So Doug, is there a lot of opposition from, I guess, what you could call like big pharma, some of the producers of these SSRIs that see this field as maybe something that's emerging as a competitor to them? So do you see that opposition from big pharma?
No, I think the big pharma will see this as an opportunity. When you look across the big pharma space, many of their psychiatry departments have gone. Over the years, they've become neurology departments. And so there's really been very little innovation in psychiatry in maybe 30 years. So when you look at the total addressable market of all of these indications that psychedelic companies are working towards, it's around $300 billion annually. So I think the big pharma will absolutely be interested in this. It's a space where there's been very little innovation for several decades.
So,
Wow.
Doug, for Cybin, I mean, the namesake comes from psilocybin in mushrooms, but I understand that you're working on other drugs as well. Which other, drugs are you working with outside of psilocybin?
Yes, we're working on some other molecules that are related. These molecules are called tryptamines, which are all like serotonin, which is a naturally occurring neurotransmitter in your brain. So we're working on some other tryptamines for anxiety disorders. We're also working on a range of molecules called phenethylamines. And these are molecules that are related to MDMA or mescaline that might help with PTSD in the future. So we have about 50 molecules in our library currently, and we're taking our lead 2 candidates into the clinic very shortly.
Wow. So for investors, our audience here is mostly retail investors, some day traders. What can they be looking out for just not with Cybin particularly, but just in the industry as a whole? Like, are we so early stage that maybe, we continue to see some of these names get beaten down, or do you think it'll be pretty quickly once we start seeing, okay, people are really noticing that, hey, look, in the psychedelic space, this has actual value and potential, and we can see those investors start coming in?
Yeah, there has been a bit of a rush over the last couple of years, companies rushing into this space. But I think we're moving from a period of news to a period of data. So Cybin was one of the first companies to release data this last week. And I think those data points will start to really separate companies from each other and differentiate them. So look out for data that's coming out of clinical studies over the next 6 to 12 months. And that will really set some of these companies apart, I think, from some earlier stage organizations that are not quite up to speed yet.
Good question here from our chat. How does the FDA's new designation for Cybins work affect the timeline for commercialization? This is from Solar Up.
Yeah, potentially the breakthrough therapy status could accelerate the timeline to commercialization. There's 2 things really. The first is that FDA performs a rolling review, and that just means that they look at the data that you submit in real time, not in lumps at certain time points. And that's much more efficient. You also get to collaborate with FDA and ask questions, which means that instead of guessing what they're looking for, you can take advice on what they're looking for. And typically with breakthrough therapy status 2, FDA requires perhaps just 1 phase 3 study, which are the big expensive studies, rather than 2. So that could save time and cost of coming to market as well.
Got it. So do you have any like ballpark timeline on when you hope to get some of these drugs through the pipeline with FDA approval?
Yes, so unfortunately, drug development is quite slow, but for a reason, for good reason.
Kidding.
Treatments have to be safe, and they have to be tested well so that they can be prescribed for patients. So from where we are today, we're looking at the kind of 4 to 5 year time frame still to get through those major clinical studies, with the first one kicking off in early 2022.
And then from Brendo, likewise with cannabis, or as what happened to cannabis, do you foresee it being a case of we get medical first, then recreation, and then later on some states doing both at the same time? Or
Yeah, I don't think so. These are very much going down the pharmaceutical route, and the concept here is that they would be given under supervision in a clinical setting and combined with psychotherapy. So patients will go through a period of therapy associated with their treatment. And it seems to be the combination of the psychotherapy and the molecule and the drug itself that lead to these good outcomes. In some studies, we've seen 4 times the effect size of SSRIs, so 4 times greater effect at treating depression when combining the psychotherapy with the molecule. So it's hard to see with this current generation of molecules that there'll be a recreational element.
okay, makes sense.
So, Doug, have you seen a big shift over the last couple of years just in sentiment regarding some of these drugs becoming, like viable treatments? Because I'm sure, 5 years ago, there would be doctors that scoffed and said, oh, this isn't real medicine, et cetera. But now it seems like more and more people are taking this field seriously.
And it's not just doctors. I mean, first of all, psychiatrists are typically fairly open-minded about trying new treatments for their patients. But then you add in the FDA and the DEA throwing their support behind this work. And then also major blue chip biotech funds, that many of which have invested in Cybin, are really getting behind this as well. And when you start to see the smart money getting into the space, and you know there's real potential.
Got it. So I think one of you mentioned that in the last 30 years, there hasn't been that much, development or improvement in psychiatric care. And I think one of the problems is that a lot of doctors, see it as, okay, I'm going to prescribe someone, this SSRI, and that should help alleviate the symptoms or help solve the problem. But, oftentimes a lot of psychiatrists talk about some more holistic measures on top of the medicine. Is Cybin, looking at some of these other holistic, things people can do to improve their mental health outside of the drug? Or is it simply you're just trying to develop this molecule that you think will be a better option?
Well, it starts with the molecule. Let's make sure that these molecules have a realistic duration that can be scalable. And let's make sure they're safe and well tolerated so we minimize the side effects. But you also want to make sure, given the nature of these molecules, that they're given in a safe environment. So we've created a psychotherapy program called Embark. It takes in 6 domains of best practice psychotherapy, and we're using that to train therapists that will apply the therapy in our clinical trials. And we're making that open source so therapists can get trained if they want to do that, but also to make sure that we're applying psychotherapy in a consistent way and putting patients in a safe environment.
Yeah, I was just curious if that was part of the, I guess, quote unquote treatment plan. Is like, okay, we'll get this patient on, say, CYB3, but that patient should also be getting, I don't know, X amount of hours of sleep a week or exercise, having the other things that help factor into someone's mental health outside of just what drugs they're taking.
Yeah, of course. I mean, exercise, eating well, getting good sleep are all good contributors to mental health. When we look back at some of the academic studies that have been performed using psychedelic drugs, those that have reduced or eliminated the psychotherapy have been shown to be less effective. So it really does seem to be a combination of the psychotherapy and the drug together. So it forms a kind of a package that helps people overcome the trauma that's underlying their depression or their addiction.
So, Doug, what drew you to this industry? I mean, do you have more of a psychiatric background or more of a chemistry background? How did you get here?
Yeah, I started out my career in a lab, but I've been in pharmaceuticals and the healthcare industry for 30 years. So I've been developing drugs for that time. And, like most of us, you guys too, I'm sure, we all know someone, a loved one, family, friends, has been affected by depression or addiction, suicides. It's tragic. It seems it's all around us. So in 30 years of drug development, I don't think I've had an opportunity in that time to help as many people in such a profound way as we can with psychedelics. So it's our mission to really turn these into therapeutics once and for all.
So, but do you have anything that drew you particularly to psychedelics, or was it just that you identified that, hey, this is a good opportunity here to maybe help tackle some of these problems once and for all?
Well, they're truly groundbreaking. I mean, like I said, I have family and friends that have been deeply impacted by this. And to be able to combine your work with helping the people that you love is never a bad thing. And it's rare that you see data like we see with psychedelics and how profound the effect can be. Literally patients who have spent years of addiction walking away from a psychedelic session and free from those addictive cravings for weeks or months at a time from just one session. I've not seen anything like that in my career. So this is an enormous opportunity.
Got it. Well, Doug, thank you for coming on the show today. We will have to get you back on as